Well, good evening, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome once again to my show. It's called McDuff Lives. And tonight, welcoming for the first time, Mr. Paul Gallagher. Paul Gallagher is the economics co-chair of EIR. That's the Executive Intelligence Review, a publication that I've referred to many, many times in the past year or so. And tonight, I've asked him to join us as part of a series I'm doing on Friday nights to go through the publication of EIR that is entitled The Great Leap Backwards, how the LaRouche organization exposed the Green New Deal. And that is the subject of a number of essays in this book, a book that I got a copy of, and I hope everyone will consider getting a copy of it, because it's got the things you can talk about, the things you can tell your friends, or you can tell other people that might want to get into the details of why we're so concerned about these issues. So I will defer to Paul Gallagher for the rest of the details, but I my first thing that I have to say is I'm really honored to have Paul Gallagher with us, a longtime journalist, researcher, and fighter for the truth in many, many ways. So with that, good evening, Paul, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, John. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
That's great. Well, again, and thanks again to EIR for all the work that you guys do. Your publication is at LaRouchePub.com. Have I got that correct? Just so people, if they want to find it, where would you direct them to?
Yeah, that's correct. It's www.larouchepub.com, meaning our publication website, as opposed to the political website, the LaRouche organization website.
Yes, okay. And it's through the LaRouche organization website that I've been working with Harley Schlanger for about 6 months now. And what a pleasure he is to work with on a fairly regular basis. Now I'll be seeing him again next week. So
he does most of the work on our on our website. He's an incredible speaker and organizer.
Wow, and he really is great. I mean, I think everything about what he does technically is superb, and that I really appreciate. Well, you are have been involved in the economic side of EIR for many, many years. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, where you come from, a bit of a little resume, and then we'll get into the content of the articles.
Well, I think maybe what would interest people more than my early history. I mean, I started out as a public school teacher for years. It was in that capacity that I started to get interested in Lyndon LaRouche's classes many years ago, and particularly into what we named from 75 on the Fusion Energy Foundation, 1975. That was the publisher of Fusion magazine and the International Journal of Fusion Energy. And we made it our business to try to inform people about a new field of breakthroughs, more important perhaps than in any other technological field going on in the world. That is the prospect of a breakthrough to thermonuclear fusion energy, the energy in the way that the sun produces it or in other stars produce it, and the possibility of producing it in machines here on Earth and using it for many, many uses, including very high-speed propulsion in space travel and other things. But at the same time, we were firmly pro-nuclear in the sense of the fission nuclear industry, the industry that people see around them in some countries. By far the safest and the most reliable form of energy that we have used as human beings thus far. And we defended that against all attacks. That magazine was published through the 80s and became the second biggest popular science magazine in this country after Scientific American. But it was censored. This is not a surprise, perhaps, to some people now. It was censored literally by the federal government, which used a bankruptcy as part of the first attempts to get Lyndon LaRouche out of the way by legal means and prosecutorial means. They used a forced bankruptcy in order to stop the Fusion magazine from publishing. And over the last 20 years, most of the time I've worked in this capacity with the EIR. I also was prosecuted along with Lyndon LaRouche in the 1990s. And that was really what the point at which it became absolutely clear that his movement was fighting for something which the international elite just wouldn't allow, the financial elite just wouldn't allow, and that they would prosecute him and people associated with him on any grounds whatsoever in order to try to take our voice away. So I've been through that and worked very hard now on this magazine, and particularly on this special report that you were talking about, which the Great Leap Backwards, we exposed the Green New Deal. That's something that absolutely had to be done. It had to be done thoroughly and circulated on a mass scale. That's what we're trying to do now.
Oh, before we get into that, I have to ask you about the experience you had of getting prosecuted. And I know that most of the viewers of this show are quite familiar with the fact that Robert Swan Mueller, the prosecutor of President Trump, was the prosecutor of Lyndon LaRouche. I assume he was involved in your case as well. Oh, we've lost your audio. There you are.
Yeah. Mueller formed, along with William Weld, who more recently tried to run as a primary candidate against Trump in 2020, former governor of Massachusetts. But at that time, he had become the number 3 in the Justice Department. William Weld had. Mueller and Weld formed a Get LaRouche Task Force, a national task force of prosecutors from the state level. It included some journalists. One of them just recently died, Pat Lynch of NBC, but there were quite a number of other ones who were brought along for the ride in order to write slanders and attacks on LaRouche, which they definitely did in the 1980s in huge numbers. And so Mueller and Weld had this task force, and resulted in me personally, unlike LaRouche, being persecuted on a state level by the state of Virginia. And the charges were really pretty fantastic. We were, because we had been involved in raising funds for LaRouche's political campaigns when he was running for president. And some of those funds were in the form of loans. They charged us with being unregistered security broker dealers and selling unregistered securities. And so even the state commission, the Securities Commission of Virginia, took a look at that and said, we don't understand this. They said, this is a case of first impression. We can't decide on it. And so that delayed the prosecution, but they worked then on the commissioners. One of them was made a judge, and so on and so forth. They got them back together to make a decision. Oh, yes, these were securities, unregistered securities. And so for that, we were prosecuted for securities fraud. And I spent nearly 7 years in prison in the 1990s.
Oh my! I suspected that you had spent some time in prison, but I hadn't, got the details. That's a tragic thing to break into the middle of your life like that, and I'm so sorry to hear it. And that's so I'm fascinated by the whole story, and I had read that the account of how those loans became the subject of prosecution that led to people being imprisoned for 7 years, and it just shows you that if they want to get you, they can get you at this point. There's a lesson to be learned just from this story alone, without even getting into your expertise, but just your struggle as a journalist, as a truth teller, is very, very important. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your service, I guess is the right way to put it. Okay, now let's get on to the EIR article that we've wanted to focus on tonight, if we may. First of all, I'm going to ask Aaron to put that up on the screen. And if you can see that, Paul, perhaps you can use that to talk your way through whatever points you would like to get to. And Aaron can slide it up to the appropriate pages. If that works for you, then I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I think you can see as he's going through, and also
slow down, Aaron.
From the little banner down at the bottom, which says 40 out of 70, that this is a lengthy, it's got 18 different pieces of exposure journalism. Well, a few of them are from Mr. LaRouche, who passed away in 2019. They are programmatic statements from him on what has to be done to pull the economy back into successful expansion, industrialization, development of new infrastructure. But most of these are exposing, and we thought it was necessary in order for the Green New Deal to be reversed. And I say reversed because many people may think that President Trump was stopping it, or that it's now threatening us. Forget that. It is already implemented. We are in a battle to reverse it. I'll give you just one example. As everyone knows, President Trump was a strong advocate of the coal industry and of coal-fired electrical power, and also of nuclear power. While he was president, nearly half of all the coal-fired power plants in the United States were closed down, in spite of his policies. And 4 of the 104 nuclear plants in the country closed during the same period of time, and none were added. And I don't mean to belittle the attempts that his administration made for those technologies, but the Green New Deal is only going to be reversed if people, literally in tens of thousands and more, understand what it is, and that their very lives depend on reversing it before it completely deindustrializes our country and our society. The other thing that we wanted to expose, which most people don't know about the so-called Green Deal, as in Europe it's called the Green Deal or the Great Reset. Here they call it the Green New Deal to try to grab onto the coattails of Franklin Roosevelt, but believe me, he would have had absolutely nothing to do with this. This comes ultimately from the the biggest financial circles in the world. It does not come from governments. It's being imposed. And again, if I could take the example of the coal-fired power plants in the United States, who shut them down over the last, in total, 6 years, it took to shut down half of all these plants in the U.S. 2 individuals essentially ran that campaign. Michael Bloomberg, people remember him, the billionaire who made the weird entry in the middle of the Democratic primary this past year and then disappeared again, but who was the big money bags of the entire Democratic field, and lives in London, is now Sir Michael a multi-deca billionaire, runs a campaign called Beyond Coal and has been for a decade now. His partner in that in particular is Larry Fink, the chair of BlackRock Inc., which is the largest financial firm in the world, with about $8 trillion under management. And Fink and BlackRock use that power nowadays to disinvest and force disinvestment out of companies that continue to produce with or invest in coal, and increasingly now oil, and it will soon be natural gas as well. This is the way the Green New Deal is being enforced. Governments have a certain secondary role to these people, but essentially this is private financial power being used in order to shut down this flow of investment and credit into industries that are to be stopped, starting with these power industries, but by no means stopping there. And the other thing that people don't understand about it, most people don't, is that at the very top planning level of this Green New Deal and these financial circles for the last 25, nearly 30 years, has been Prince Charles of the UK and the British Crown, the British royal family more broadly, including Prince Charles having invented both the term and the organization Green New Deal back in 2007, and having started an organization by that name in the UK in 2008. He has been on this since 1992 and has started more and runs more associations of financial companies, accounting companies, environmental organizations than any other individual in the world by far, including having basic control now over the agendas of the so-called World Economic Forum, the Davos conferences. That flows directly from the worldview of the British royal family, which is that there are far too many human beings on the planet, that the human race has to be culled in the way that animal herds are culled, and that this is the way to do it, by pushing them back to a quote-unquote more simple lifestyle, one which supports fewer people. So those stakes are what we were trying to make clear, so that people who more or less instinctively or by their common sense and their reason know that they should be against this Green New Deal, they should help stop it. We wanted to try to arm them with what they really need to know in order to do that.
All right. Well, I happen to live in the district of Congressman Steny Hoyer, the majority leader in House of Representatives from Maryland. And we just happen to have gotten blessed by the appointment of Dr. Robert Redfield as a kind of a medical czar here under Governor Larry Hogan. And as you can, as what I see here in Maryland is happening all around the country, is that it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you're either in or you're out. And Hogan is definitely in. He being a Republican, Steny Hoyer being a Democrat, he definitely is in as well. And I'm thinking, well, what can I do to? Is there what do I need to say? To whom can I say it? And how? I mean, you've given us a great arsenal here of 70 pages of technical and logical and other reasons why that this Green New Deal has to stop. But when it comes to actually trying to get it stopped, the people with the levers, their hands on the levers are not me. They're the politicians. And what can I do? Send them a copy of this and say, hey, please read it. And but I don't know. I guess I'm feeling a little frustrated in knowing that you're absolutely right, but what can we do?
Well, first of all, I'd say you're doing something right now. You have a platform and you're using it for the purpose of trying to turn back a complete deindustrialization of the United States. And that's obviously not going to be easy. If you ask me to name what will be the actual steps that could save our economy from being destroyed completely by this, well, they would start with an act to break up the Wall Street banks, a restoration of the Glass-Steagall Act, which would reduce the power, and also correct the functioning, but it would reduce the power of the financial institutions in the City of London and on Wall Street, which are now the primary enforcers of the Green New Deal against companies of all kinds, against local governments of all kinds, against individuals. And we've seen recently in Texas just what that practice of the Green New Deal can do to human beings. It would start with that. And since, as we're making clear in here, the way the Green New Deal is working is by the withdrawal of investment and credit out of, for example, companies that build coal-fired or nuclear power plants. This is going on all over the world. We have some case studies in here outside the United States, particularly South Africa, the Philippines, and Indonesia, where there have been the sudden shutdown of coal power projects and operating coal power plants because BlackRock, Larry Fink's company, put excruciating financial pressure on a Korean global engineering company called KEPCO, which was involved in building all of these power plants. And literally in a flash, so to speak, KEPCO pulled out of all of them. And those things are not being built, or the one in South Africa, which was running, has been shut down. In countries like this, which already live with chronic blackouts and insufficient power supplies, which make their hospitals unsafe. You can't operate hospitals without absolutely reliable, considerable amounts of reliable power. It makes many things that they do difficult, unsafe, almost inhuman. They're already struggling with this. You tell them that we're now going to force the shutdown of everything producing power with coal, and you're not going to build any nuclear power plants. These countries don't have them yet. They're not going to build any. That's a death sentence. In this country, at this point, we've begun to see what this can do when you look at the number of people who died in the deep freeze in Texas. I can get into that more in terms of, well, I will. So since that is the withdrawal of credit targeted at these companies, we need an institution which can instead replace that credit and more in order to build that kind of infrastructure power, but on a more modern basis. And such a thing would be a national infrastructure bank. The Federal Reserve could be nationalized. That's the quickest way to do it. So those are the kind of steps that will really reverse this. Now, obviously, they are not right in front of us now. So what we're doing now and asking other people to do is essentially a war of knowledge and understanding, a war for the truth here. To the Texas example, we have seen in recent days demands by a leading think tank in Washington, the so-called German Marshall Fund, although it has nothing to do with Germany. And those demands amplified in the Washington Post newspaper and other press, demanding that Facebook and YouTube and Twitter should deny their platforms to people claiming that the failure of wind turbines in Texas triggered the blackout. There is an absolute war on, since elected officials in Texas and elsewhere when that disaster was happening, a number of them, including the governor, said, this happened because we have so many wind farms and they froze. There has been an absolute propaganda war against that since then. And this was simply one instance, but one in which a number of Democratic senators were quoted in the Washington Post demanding that Facebook take action to prevent this kind of disinformation, as they call it, from getting on social media. So we're at now a kind of information and knowledge war over what the Green New Deal actually is, what its intentions are, what it means. And what you suggested, getting these reports, these PDF copies of these reports from EIR and from LaRouche Pub, from that website, and circulating them to people, including elected officials, that is definitely worth doing. And as I say, you have a platform and you're using it, and that is definitely contributing to this as well.
You know what I think about is the cities, Paul. I think of people that are, say, living in Baltimore, not too far north from where I am, and how dependent they are on the grocery stores and the transportation systems of bringing the food in. And they're going to be dependent upon whatever food sources are allowed to them, which might very well be degraded by just the fact that they're shipped across the country, that they are given preservatives, that they're just another way that I'm concerned that the concentration of people into cities over the past 2 centuries or more is now put millions of people in an untenable position if anything happens to the economy. Because as you say, if the economy should stop having the infrastructure to maintain the roads, for instance, it takes power to do things like make concrete, and it takes power to lay asphalt, and all of these things that will gradually break down. But I think people out in the country can more or less fend for themselves, but people in the city, I think they're the ones that are the most vulnerable, and at the same time, they're the ones that are the target of the propaganda, the easiest marks for people that are going to believe that such a thing is actually a good thing, that we're going to get back down to the barter system, and that'll be great for the world. And they're vulnerable and are gullible, and they're I just worry about people, just the millions of people that are just in a very, very tight place, whether it's in Baltimore or New York or Brazil, or you know what I'm saying? I think that this is a problem that has to be addressed organically, and I just think there's so much land out there that it's just all growing nothing but Monsanto, monocrops. Why can't we get people back out onto the land and move people out of these cities? Do you ever think of that as an avenue of relieving this stress?
We definitely work with a number of leaders of farm organizations, because you're right that they are in a better position to understand what's hitting them often than people in the cities are. And food is very definitely a target of the Great Reset, so-called, the Green New Deal. In Europe, they have a program they called Farm to Fork. And here they call it Replant Capital, although that's one of a number of them. These are run by the unfortunately hugely concentrated food distribution companies. Replant Capital, I think the biggest company in it is Danone, or Danone, the French company that we know from Danone yogurt, a lot of us. But they're a very, very large international dairy company, much too concentrated, like all of the food distribution companies are. And they've gone with the Green New Deal. And so what they mean by replant capital, take your capital out of farms and farmland that is well fertilized, that is well managed, that has high productivity, food productivity, and put it into perhaps farmland that has been converted to solar farms or to wind parks. And people who drive around the country in rural areas know, especially in the whole Midwest, just how widespread this is. That farmers have been induced financially to turn over their fields to solar panels and to wind turbines. And now you even have this Tom Vilsack, the new agriculture secretary, who's also the very old agriculture secretary. He's back in there, but he's got a new suit of clothes on, and he's now an environmentalist, and he wants to use the Commodity Credit Corporation to pay farmers to do this kind of thing. It's completely against the law which established the CCC back in the New Deal days, but he wants to do it. And farmers know that they are giving up on their true human function when they do this. So they tend to resist it. They're given financial inducements, but they tend to resist it. The problem is that on top of them are these huge food cartels. And without those cartels being broken up, which is another, not just the banks, but also these cartels, without them being broken up, the farmers really can't combat this. We saw it again in the COVID pandemic, the terrible conditions that developed at the food packing plants full of migrant workers who were practically slaves in some of these huge hog processing and cattle processing, beef processing plants out there. This does not have to be done. The people working in those plants are much less productive. They literally process less animals in a given day than a guy with a modern, what did they used to call them? Meat locker. You know, a modern technology, small local meatpacking operation is doing much more productive work, even by the measures of ordinary efficiency, than somebody in one of these plants that turned into hellholes during the pandemic. So they just have, those things have to be broken up, and they have become the vehicles, those huge companies, for imposing the green ideology on farming. And if you go to the top level in the UK, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, at the recent conference at Davos, they said food is the problem. Where the human race is growing too much food. They don't pull punches or make bones about it. The human race is growing too much food, eating too much food. It should eat plants instead of meat, and it should eat less plants. We have that little document in the report so that people can actually read it for themselves. That this is the objective of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And that was the whole subject of this 5-day conference of the World Economic Forum at the end of January, which is also profiled in this special report, as is the 30-year history of Prince Charles and how he has piece by piece put together this global environmentalist machine, which is now threatening not our way of life, it's threatening our lives. And we're only just beginning to see that in what's happening in serious power failures. But they are going not just after the power industry, not just after the food industry. Again, we have a document in here which shows this. They also name the 7 deadly categories of industrial activity: producing cement, producing aluminum, producing steel, producing automobiles, producing ships, producing planes. What does that leave you, folks? All these things they say, use up more than the total amount of carbon that the world is going to be allowed to use in the next 15 years. Therefore, we have to cut these industries down. So it's not just power and it's not just food. And it's going to take a real information and knowledge warfare on our part in order to turn this around.
Well, that's what I'm hoping to accomplish here on these Friday night chats with you and your colleagues from EIR. And I want to just flesh out a little bit of what you're saying about the British royals. And I would caution it by, I would start by saying the last time I went into Prince Charles's father at any depth, my show suddenly just got swept right off of the internet. It was gone right in the middle of my broadcast. So without mentioning said Royal Highness's father, do go ahead and connect it a little bit more closely for the people that might not be familiar, because it seems extraordinary, really, to folks that maybe are just tuning in and thinking, well, why is he blaming all this on the British royals? Well, what did they do?
Well, we're not blaming it all on them. What we're saying is this is where the direction is coming from. Immediately, you have a quartet there of the royal family or the crown estates, the Bank of England, the City of London banks, and the kind of permanent civil service, what some people here call the deep state. We call it the shallow empire. And that's what they have to work with as a whole. The two things that I think maybe would illustrate this most quickly. First of all, as people may know, all of the members of the royal family, particularly Prince Charles and his unnamed father, are on record over and over and over during their lifetimes as saying that the human race is far too numerous on the earth. That these very numerous human beings pollute the earth. They're in the way. They take up too much space, too much land, too much everything, and there need to be fewer of them. That tells you a lot about the Green New Deal right there. Secondly, if you look at just what they're doing in the UK, you get an idea of the power. The Crown Estates, on behalf of the royal family, owns and administers the entire shoreline of the British Isles, Scotland, Ireland, Britain, Wales, all of the shore out to 12 miles to the edge of their sea bottom is owned by the Crown Estates, and it's up to them to lease activity on it. Recently, they expanded tremendously their leasing of wind farms on these offshore seabeds. They're going to make, the royal family itself is going to make hundreds of millions of dollars a year starting immediately from these new leases. The Crown Estates as a whole is going to make on the order of $16 billion equivalent over the next decade, just from these new leases. They already had a lot of leases of this kind. And this, you ask, well, where does the loot come from in this kind of thing? Already it's 26 cents a kilowatt hour average to buy electricity, to pay for electricity in the UK. Here it's roughly 10 cents. In Germany, which is much more overrun by windmills and solar farms even than the UK, it averages 35 cents. In Denmark, which leads everybody, it's 40 cents, 4 times what we pay. That gives you an idea where the loot comes from that makes all these large construction companies and financial combines leap in there to make these leases off the coasts of the British Isles in order to put their wind farms out there, because soon, as they understand, half of all of the power in England and in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, half of it at least will be coming from wind, solar, and wood. They have the distinction there that they have the largest wood-burning power plant in the world, and they get 6% of their power already from it. So you talk about primitivism. But, I mean, this gives you an idea of a kind of 14th century monarchy, 15th century monarchy, which owns vast areas of lands outright, owns the seacoasts outright, charges everybody for every use of them, rakes in billions and billions of pounds as a result, and also at the same time prevents development of industry. And that is absolutely the key. It prevents development of industry. Now, Charles began to export this kind of thing in 1992 when he was put in charge of the Rio Summit of 1992. That was the first of what were called the Earth Summits. The board which ran it was Prince Philip, Prince Charles, and Maurice Strong, a Canadian aide and businessman and aide of Prince Philip. But they let Charles run it. He was a young man at that time. And from that time on, every one of these Earth Summits, people talk about the Paris Accords that President Trump drew us out of, the Paris Climate Accords. They were in 2015. They were economy-wrecking accords. But that was only the latest in a series of Earth summits that had been going on since 1992. And the prince has been the principal in organizing and directing each one of those summits. And he's accumulated increasingly powerful colleagues in doing this. We also concentrate on Mark Carney, who was the head of the Bank of England for 8 years until a year and a half ago. Also was head of the Financial Services Board of the Bank of International Settlements. Also was head of the Planning Committee for the Davos conferences. This was the most influential central banker in the world, including the Fed. This was the most influential central banker in the world in the last decade. And he's virtually a partner and follower of Prince Charles, uses the same phrases, the same language. And Carney, in the committees of bankers that he's set up, he says very bluntly, he said this at the UN a year and a half ago, those companies which play by the new rules of the net zero carbon future, those companies are going to do very well. Companies which don't play by these rules, they are going to cease to exist. That was his words. And in what he calls the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, Carney has pulled together, along with Bloomberg, his pal, they have pulled together 24 central banks and 34 other of the largest private banks in the world as effectively the enforcement arm in doing the kind of thing that BlackRock does that I described earlier, but doing it across the globe. So that is what we start the report after a very good introduction on what's at stake from Helga Zepp-LaRouche's widow. We start the report making clear what the role of the British royal family is, what the role of so-called green finance is, so that people will be absolutely clear. This is not Joe Biden. I mean, it is Joe Biden because he's on board with it, but it's not him. He's on board with something he's been told to do, and he's, I think for his own reasons, happy to do it, and immediately started shutting down oil exploration and pipelines and so forth. But it's not coming from him or from any government. These forces would really rather have very weak governments, because fascism, is what it really is a combination of the biggest banks, along with certain political parties with a tendency to violence, but the biggest banks and the biggest industrial or financial corporations taking over the power of a state and essentially putting somebody in charge of the state who works for them. And that was true of Mussolini. It was true of Hitler, although Hitler got out of hand for them after a few years. But it was definitely true of Hitler when they put the Nazis in. That really is the way fascism works, and that's the way they want this Green New Deal to be enforced.
I can't remember where I read it, but it made sense to me that the lockdowns that we've been experiencing, and that was going to be 2 weeks, and then it was 6 weeks, and now what has it been, a year in some cases, almost. These may have a secondary purpose other than keeping us healthy, and that would be to reduce all of our energy usage as a country. That we're not running up and down the highway to get to work anymore, and we're not burning up that much of oil. And so is it a subtle way of allowing them to get rid of the power capacity, since in fact we don't need as much as we did before the lockdowns? And I'll say it what you say really resonates with me, because 10 miles from here, there's a coal burning power plant, which is a big power plant right on the Potomac River. It's been there for most of my life. And about 10 years ago, they decided to clean it up. So they put those scrubber things on it and new new stacks, and it only doesn't spit ash out anymore. It's just some water vapor with some who knows what else is in it. But it's supposed to have been really, really good for the environment, and now it's all set up clean burning. And now the rumor is they're going to shut it down. And I think, well, why did they go to all that trouble to clean it up, and now they're just going to shut it down? It's consistent with what you're saying, but you see what I'm thinking is that this Klaus Schwab taking advantage of the COVID-19 as an opportunity to institute a plan that has been on the shelf for a long time. I'm sure you've heard similar things. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it wasn't subtle, John, as I think you know. That's where the term Great Reset came from. Prince Charles had a different term, rewiring the economy. And then he had some other kind of kooky phrases like the tragedy of the horizon and so forth. But the Great Reset, as in Klaus Schwab's latest book, the head of the Davos conferences is Klaus Schwab. He himself, I think, is pretty much a doobie for the Prince and Mark Carney and the other people. But, he got to write a book. The Great Reset initially came from that idea. Well, look, in 2020, there was a lot less use of power all over the world, and you could see there was less pollution as a result. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could reset in this direction with a new economy after the pandemic? So then they began to spread the BS that somehow the Green New Deal was a reset of the economy in some positive sense, which would help us recover from the pandemic. It was a lot of horse feathers, but they definitely immediately noticed that and started to use it for propaganda. Well, here's one good thing about the pandemic, where you see we're getting along with less power. So we really could get along with less power, don't you think? So let's really get along with less power. And the coal thing is coal and nuclear really very, very important. We just did a show last Friday night with a candidate that we're backing in New York, with a lot of people on who were involved in organizations. One was a mayor, one was a union official, and so on, in trying to keep the nuclear plants from being shut down in Illinois and New York this year. The Byron and Dresden plants in Illinois and the Indian Point, the last of the Indian Point reactors near New York City. These things are absolutely vital to defend. And as far as coal goes, it's instructional to look at China. You know, a lot of people say, well, the Green New Deal, I know it's a fake because, look at China, they're polluting. But they are not, if you look at they use the language of the Paris Climate Accord. But then when you look at their plan is, from now until 2060, they say in their plan, by which they say they're getting to net zero carbon, but they're doing it 40 years from now, they say that in 2050, they will still be getting half of their power from coal and a great deal of the rest of it from nuclear. So this is not Prince Charles by a long shot. This is not what he wants. China is going ahead with its economic, technological, industrial development, while at the same time, obviously they have a lot of pollution. They'd like to clean it up. But with their coal plants, they do exactly what you described with the plant on the Potomac. They have refitted them or built new, very low emissions. They sometimes call them clean, but I think the technical term is very low emissions power plants. And basically what they're emitting is carbon dioxide and nothing else. And if you believe that carbon dioxide is a tremendous danger to the planet and the human race, then you need to learn more about it. Carbon dioxide is what the entire biosphere on which we live, what it lives on. So it's an absolutely positive contribution to, and in fact, there are some deserts in the world that have started to retreat in the very recent period in which there has been an increase in carbon dioxide concentration in the air. There are some deserts that have started to retreat as a result. That's a whole other subject. We didn't really want to fight the science out in this, but rather make people see the stakes to their economies and to their lives of allowing this kind of thing to continue.
I like the idea of picking your fights, and this is the one that you've helped us to illustrate tonight. I think, if we see them ratcheting down our ability to make efficient power, then we can see that it really is a mortal threat to our economy and to our people, to the health of people and to people whose health is already challenged. It could easily lead to early mortality. And I'm, very concerned about the lack of education and the lack of awareness of, 99% of the people wouldn't know what I was talking about if I said, we have to look at the danger of this great reset or this Green New Deal. So that's why you guys have worked so hard to produce this great booklet. It's available for only $20 at the LaRouchePub.com. And Paul, the best thing I can ask you to do for the rest is to just keep on doing what you're doing. How is to support your organization? Is it the same place? Do we just go to LaRouchePub.com and perhaps find a donate button somewhere?
Well, no, there isn't a donate button there because, as I said, that's where to get this report, this special report. It originally was a special issue of EIR, and then we made it into a special report. And that's where to get it, and you'll see it immediately right at the top of that website, www.larouchepub.com. You'll see a big banner for it right there to purchase it. But otherwise, we'd really like people to go to the LaRouche organization, www.thelaroucheorganization.com, and sign up for our emails, which are not that often. They're generally weekly, usually a newsletter is what it is. They're power packed, and they enable us to keep in touch with a really large number of people around the country, and that often still doesn't mean that people act in a concerted or unified way, because there are, as we understand, so many issues, so many problems that people face and in various ways are convinced they have to work on. But we're trying to here to make clear that it won't be possible to work on any of them if we give up essentially the Industrial Revolution. If we give up, as we have been giving up since the 1970s, really, if we give up our industry, our high technology infrastructure, which goes with industry, if we give up our investment in new technologies and science frontiers, which 50 years ago was more than 2% of our GDP, now it's half of 1% of our GDP. If we give up those things, as we have been gradually for half a century now, but now it has suddenly accelerated into a full-on attack to just break us down into an underdeveloped country. If we give that up, then we won't be able to solve these other problems. So at least now we're trying to focus people on what they can do to help reverse the progress of the Green New Deal, which is very far advanced, as I said at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm a believer, and I think everybody else is. The folks that have been watching tonight, and thanks everyone for being with us, are getting the message that this is breaking down all of the power that we have to maintain our standard of living, our health, our society, and with that will go all of our values, our individual rights, our Constitution, our form of government. Because what Paul is saying about this, as we started out the show, which I think is probably one of the most important points of tonight, aside from the ratcheting down of our power system, is also the evasion of government forms, of the evasion of, like YouTube does. They say we're a private corporation, so you can't expect us to be regulated by the communication system. Well, why do we have a government if we can't use the government to regulate the speech rights of our citizens? That is the type of evasive action that they've taken in everything, from medicine to insurance, every way that we try to preserve our health, and also the complete abrogation of protecting our financial system from these raids that keep happening by speculation. And that's the second new main point that we started with, was to reinstate a Smith-Mundt law to protect the real banks, the banks that we invest our money in for productive purposes, and try to wall off the speculative money that has been destroying the value and cutting out the underpinning of our savings, causing them to rely on things like inflation to meet their obligations, while our actual spending power shrinks and shrinks. That's all part of it as well, and we've got so many other things that we can talk about, Paul. I hope you'll come back to the show, and it's been a pleasure tonight. Anything else you'd like to add? Make sure that everyone is aware of before we close it up tonight.
We've done a tremendous job with particularly with showing these things on the screen while we've been talking, so that I think people have gotten an idea. They can get in touch with the LaRouche organization. They can regularly get newsletters and very informative and directing emails from us, and that's really what we need. We have information and knowledge which I think are essential to anybody who starts in on any single fight to keep a nuclear plant open, stop a shutdown, get a hospital built. Hospitals need a lot of power, and they need a lot of fresh water, which in turn takes a lot of power. Why do you think we're not adding a great deal to our hospital facilities during the last year when we clearly needed to do so? All these kinds of things, if you understand what the overall battle in which they're embedded, you're going to be much more effective as a citizen and maybe as a candidate yourself. And so get in touch with us at the LaRoucheOrganization.com.
All right. Paul Gallagher, it's been a pleasure tonight, and thank you once again. And thank you, Aaron. Aaron, you did a great job posting some supplemental materials as we talked. Always a pleasure to work with you and Neighborhood News Studio. So thanks, everybody. We'll send you off with the Ospreys.